Studiometry gives you complete control over the invoices, estimates, purchase orders, and reports that you produce. You can design and customize every aspect of these using our powerful, built-in template editor. Studiometry comes with several default invoice and report templates. You can modify these to your liking or create a new template from scratch. To get to the template editor and to get started, go to the Preferences window, Template section. Here we have separate lists for your visual invoice templates, your visual report templates, and then your code-based templates, which we won't be focusing on in this video. We'll start with a blank template to show you some of the basics, and then open up one of the included pre-made templates to see what one of those looks like. To create a new visual invoice template, just click on the plus button below the list. So here we have a new blank invoice template. It comes pre-populated with this text item at the top, which I'm just going to select and press the delete key to remove so that it's completely blank. And then we can go over some of the features and controls within this window. Along the top is the toolbar where we can add items and edit the template information. Clicking the Add Item button will bring up the list of all the different types of items we can add to the template. Let's start by adding a variable. A variable item will have its text replaced with a new value when you use this in an invoice template. For example, the invoice ID variable will show the associated invoice's ID number when you generate the invoice. Selecting the variable item, you can see along the right that there are now many different properties that can be modified for this variable. You can change the position, page, display settings, formatting, and more. The right pane will update with different controls and options based on the item or items that you have selected on the template. Studiometry has several hundred options for invoice template variables. Under the item information, we can click on the list and scroll through to see the extent. If you'd like to search for something specific, you can click on the search icon next to the list and enter some text to find what you're looking for. Now let's add another type of item. We'll click on the Add Item button again, and then select New Text. A text item will have its text exactly shown as is when generating the invoice. You can use this to put fixed text lines, labels, or text blocks on your template. These can be multiple lines and will wrap based on the size of the item. One special use for text items is that you can actually embed variables into the text items. To do this, select the text item and enter the text that you'd like. When you're ready to add a variable, make sure the cursor is in the correct position and press the pound icon below the text entry field. This will bring up the same variable search window from before, where you can find and use the variable. You can see that it's added to the text in the necessary format for Studiometry to parse as a variable when generating to the invoice. Let's just hit apply and then resize the text item. Now that we have a couple of items on the template, let's go over some basic options. First, we can see that the variable item has a blue circle next to it. This is to indicate that it's a variable instead of a static text item. To show or hide this indicator, you can right-click anywhere in the template or click on the Options button in the bottom left. Here we can show or hide the variable icons, and we can also toggle the grid, rulers, and margin, as well as customize the grid and margin. And we have the ability to show or hide data row outlines, which we'll go into later. The grid is used as a backdrop or overlay to help you line up your items. You can adjust the size by selecting Customize Grid and Margin. The margin is the grayed out bordered area around the outside of the template. This gives you a little more space to lay out your items, but will not be shown when you're viewing the actual invoice. The rulers are shown across the top and left of the page, and their sizes correspond to the set grid size, which can again be set by selecting Customize Grid and Margin. And most importantly are the snap settings. You can set up the editor to snap to other items or the grid when dragging to reposition or resize items. You can access these settings through the same menu through the Snap menu. So you can have it snap to all, to items, to grid, or turn snap off completely. So if we select snap to items and we drag the items around, we can see that it will snap to the borders of the other items, and you can see the line indicating which items it's snapping to. This makes it a lot easier to lay out several items in an organized fashion on your template. Okay, so let's continue with the other item types available. We'll go back up to Add Item and select New Web Link. As you can see here, whenever you add a new web link to a template, Studiometry will warn you that these links are only clickable if you export the template as a PDF. But you can create these links and set up the URL in the properties, and wherever you have this box, it will be a clickable box that will redirect to your URL. You can use variables again in your URL, so you can actually set up PayPal payment links or other complex links that will be automatically generated and added to your invoice templates. We'll just delete that for now to get it out of there, and then we'll add the next item type, which is a picture. And you can drag this around just like you could any other item, and you can click to select a picture, or you can drag and drop a picture from your computer into the template editor or the image well. Another cool feature about the picture is that Studiometry actually lets you add client and project pictures. So if you wanted to, you could select from this list and use the client image or the project image if there are one, or you can actually use images from your image library in Studiometry as well. So you have the option of adding just a fixed picture or an actual dynamic picture based on the invoice or project associated with this invoice template. So we just want to add a fixed logo at the top, so I'll click on the image well and select a picture from my computer, which we can then resize and see that it will automatically draw proportionally within the bounds of the box. Let's move on to the next item type, which is a graphics object. This can be used to add basic geometry to your templates. You can create ovals or circles, rectangles, rounded rectangles, or lines. You can use these for backdrops or for general dividers or separators. You can change the border color, you can change the fill color, and several other settings for these graphics objects. But they're very basic drawing tools that will let you customize things without having to go into Photoshop or another program and create a PNG and then drag it into Studiometry. Okay, so let's continue. Those were the top 5 item types, and those are the easy ones. The last 2 are the complicated ones, the data columns and the data rows. These are what are used to show items on your template when you have multiple items. For example, if you have 10 work items on your invoice template, you're going to need to create something on your template that will repeat and show information for each of the 10 work items. You can do this by using either data columns or data rows. We'll start with data rows because these are the recommended way of creating invoice templates in Studiometry. You have a lot more control over the layout. The rows are actually expandable or collapsible based on their content, and you can do a lot more with them than you can with data columns. So I'm going to click New Data Row, and we can see here that this big new box object was added to our template. I'll move this around to make some space for it. Okay, so what are we looking at? This data row, as we can see on the right, has the row type debt credit, also known as your work and expenses. So when you create a new invoice and you use this invoice template, it will show all of the work and expenses or debt credits using this data row. It will create one line item for each item on your invoice. And as we can see here, it will show the item name and then the item amount for the first item, and then we'll repeat that layout, showing this information for every item on the invoice. Now if we want to edit these variables or the layout for each item, we can either click Edit Data Row over here on the right, or we can actually click on the name of the data row type here. The cursor will change to a little finger pointer, so we know that's a little clickable area. When we click on this, then we're brought to the data row template editor. So just think of this as like a mini invoice template that's used within your invoice template for every single work item. However we lay this out, it will be repeated for every single item on your invoice. We can still add many of the same types of items, such as variables, text, picture, and graphics objects, but we can't add more data rows within data rows or data columns or anything like that, because that's too complicated and wouldn't serve the purpose. So let's really quickly just add item details to this so that we can have a little more detailed of a template. I'm going to select these two items and move them up using the arrow keys, and then add a new variable and drag it down, and we can see within here it will snap still. And then I'll select my variable. Now I want to be able to show all the notes that we put in for the work items, so I'm going to search here for notes, and we can see item extra info, so I'll double click that, and now we have it selected. Now the great part about data rows is that they can expand vertically based on the items within the data row. So if we want to have this data row expand vertically, first we can set the minimum height over here, which is the minimum height that the data row will be, which is 50. But we can also allow it to expand. And to do that, we'll just select any item within the data row template and change the height from constant to flexible. So now this extra info, if the text in here is too long to fit within one line, it'll expand vertically to fit all of the text until it's all shown. And that will push all the items after this down so that they will all fit within the generated invoice. So I'm just going to change the formatting on this a little bit to make it look a little different than the item name. And then when I click done and we go back to the main template, we can see now that the changes that we just made have been reproduced for each item here within this data row area. Now as you can see, the name for the row type is overlapping some of the variables that we have within here. So if we want to be able to see that better, we can right click and then we can turn off that show data row outlines option from before. And then we'll just see the actual rows, but we won't have the outline for each individual item. So it's really just a preference if you want to see it like this, or see a little more detail for where they start and end like this. So while we're still on the topic of data rows, this is just the debt credit item row area. So this will show all the work items on the invoice, but we have a lot of options for different data row types. And what this will do is basically for each different option that we select, it will populate this list with different items that are associated with the invoice or the report. So you can have your hourly items, your categories, you can have employee information, you can even use this to show taxes or payments associated with the invoice. And for each of these, let's say I, for example, select tax, we can change the data row template for the actual row based on the row type. So I'll change this back to debt credit, and I can create a second data row, and let's say we want to show taxes down here. So I'll just change this one to taxes type, and then when we edit the data row we can see the new taxes template. So we'll rearrange this a little bit to make it fit. And then hit done to go back to the main template. And we just have a quick little tax section here. So this will repeat for each tax type that we have and show the tax name and the tax amount. Now you can have as many data row areas as you'd like on a page, but they can start to kind of clutter up. And the other thing is, if you have, for example, a large amount of debt credit items and you want to after that show a fixed totals area, there's no way to do that by just dragging these around. You'd have to lay out the page based on the size of the page and just put this at the bottom, and then you might have some blank space here. If you wanted to create one of the more complex data row types, we can select this, and there's two a little more advanced data row types. There's the combo data row, and then there's the projects debts data row. And when we select either of these, we'll start with projects debts. This will change the interface over here so that we can see the combo order is what it's called. So this is still a data row area, and we can see here we're still showing individual line items. We still have our 3 work items here. But before that, we have the project headers and the project footers. As you can see here, the project header, and then we have our 3 corresponding sample debt credit item row areas, and then we have a project footer. And where this is useful is if you have a multi-project invoice, it will show the project header for a project, and then it will show all of the work items for that project, and then a footer for that project as well. And then it will go on to the next project with the header, with the work items, and then the footer, and so on until all projects and all work items have been shown. So this is a way of organizing the work items on your invoice template by project while still being able to have a project header, project subtotals, and whatever other information that you would like in these headers and footers that are wrapping the work items within your invoice template. And the other more advanced data row type is what's called a combo data row area. Now this is just basically a blank combo area where you can then click the plus button and add any type of data row. You can add one after another, and so basically if we had, for example, the debt credit item row area, that would use our debt credit item row template. We can double click on this here, or like before, we can click on the name here to edit those, and then say after that we want to have our taxes. We could add tax item row area. And we can see now that these are consolidated into one big area, so we no longer need this one. So I'll delete that. And then I'm just going to go in and I'll double click on this to change the tax row to maybe make it a little shorter. It doesn't need to be that tall. Then I'll click done. We can see here that each of these items is a variable height dependent on what's in there. So if the first work item has a large item extra info variable, that can expand vertically and push everything else down, but the taxes only need to take up so much space. So it's all dependent upon the way that you set up each of these different templates within your data row area. So if after this we wanted to add a section to show the totals for the invoice, we could do that as well. I'm just going to click the plus button and go down to custom row area 1. Now these are just basically blank areas where you can put in any variables or static text or graphics objects or pictures, but they will display once. So if I add this in, this will just display once within here after the item before it. So I can double click on this and I can edit this row area and add in any of the variables that I'd like, which I'll do now. Okay, so let's click down here and we'll go back to the main page, and we can see now that this custom row 1 area has the design that we just created. Now if we want to organize this a little bit, we can rename this just so that later when we come back we'll know that it's the totals area. And we can add in as many variables into here as we'd like, but this is just a basic quick template to show you how it works. Okay, so now that we have a data row area set up pretty well, we want to look at the pages aspect of templates. Now each invoice or report template can have multiple customizable pages. This template has 2 pages, for example, but we've only added anything to the first page. How these pages are calculated is, for example, if this data row, let's say we have 15 work items, we can see here we'll fit 3, 4, 5, maybe 6. After that's filled up, Studiometry will then create the next page and then fill up whatever data row area is available there. So that means that we have to have a combo data row area available in the second page, otherwise not everything will be shown on the template. The easiest way to do this is we'll just select the items from the first page that we want to put on the second page, and then we can copy by right-clicking and selecting copy or Apple C, and then go to the next page and paste. And now these items are created on page 2. Now let's say you have an invoice that has 100 items on it. We can see the difference between page 1. There's a couple different interface elements on page 1 than there are on page 2. So what will happen is page 1 will be shown once here, which it's explained up here, and then after that it will just show page 2 indefinitely until all of the items have been shown. And you can customize this behavior by going to the template info button, and this brings up the template info window. The general settings are pretty self-explanatory, but where we want to go here is pages. This is where we can change the number of unique pages that we can design, and we can also change the repeating page. So if we want page 1 to repeat indefinitely, we can set that as the repeating page. If we want it to be page 2, we could set that as the repeating page. You can also check whether or not it will always show page 1 and page 2. So for example, if the entire invoice could be shown on one page, we don't need to always show page 2. So you have a lot of control over the number of pages and which page will show all of your items, and that can be done in your template info window. And while we're in here, we'll take a quick detour to PDF backdrops. These are just basically, you can have any of your pages have a backdrop of a PDF file. So what will happen is that when Studiometry generates the invoice, it will put that PDF file as the backdrop of the page, and then put all of the other interface elements on top of the PDF file. So if you already have a pre-designed PDF template or backdrop or header or anything like that, you can use that as a backdrop in your Studiometry invoice template, and you can add that through this PDF backdrop section. So really quick, we'll go back to pages, and I'll just create a third page, and let's say we always show this. Now page 1 and 2 we've already set up, but let's say page 3 we want to have a lot of terms and conditions. We can just add a third page here, and then I'll hit OK, and then up here we can see, if we go to the first page, it'll say this page is only showed once. Second page, this is the repeating page that will be repeated until all of the items have been shown. And on the third page, this will be generated once, and we don't even have a data row area on here. But let's say we want to put our terms or conditions or just a large amount of text on here that will be shown at the end of every invoice. We can do that here. So we could just create this and add any amount of text that we want. And this will be shown at the end of every invoice that we create. So those are the basics for creating a data row area and using them to create multiple pages, and basically just creating your functional and dynamic invoice template. Now the other thing that we kind of skipped over before was data column. Now this is similar to a data row, and we're just going to briefly go into it because these aren't used as much anymore because they're not nearly as powerful. But if you want to quickly add information of a certain item type, you can add it through a data column. So I'll click this, and we can see here we have a new data column. So the difference between data rows and data columns is for data rows, each item is its own row. So for your work items, you would have one entire row that you can lay out all of the variables and items for that work item, and it will show that, and then it will create another row for the next work item. Data columns are kind of the opposite of that, where each column is for a specific variable. This will still loop through all of the work items on your invoice, showing the amount for each, but you'll need to add multiple columns and try to lay them out so that they're next to each other, and so that it would line up, so that when you produce the invoice it will make sense. So if we change this variable, for example, to, or this variable over here, to item name, then the item name here will correspond with the item amount here. So this is one way of doing it, and this is generally only used for smaller things. Like, it's good if you want to easily set up a taxes section. You can come down here and we can see the tax name and the tax amount. and then we can resize these so that they're much smaller. So you may not need to use an entire data row for your taxes. You could just use data columns, and then you can reposition this to the bottom of the template if you'd like. But that's the difference between data columns and data rows. Data columns, you need to create multiple ones and set up the variables for each, and Studiometry will just go item by item for each of these and fill out the variables. Whereas with the data rows, you have complete control of the layout. They can be flexible in height, and you can do a lot more with them. So that's pretty much it. There's a lot more advanced features as well, which you can find information about on our website. But if you've made it this far, congratulations. You're about 25 minutes into a video about using invoice templates in Studiometry. So there's a lot of information in here. So obviously you might have questions or maybe want a little better explanation of a certain part of this video. So if you have any questions, please feel free to get a hold of us at support.oranged.net.